Hello, everyone. My name is Louise Gough, and I am Screen Australia's Director of Narrative Content. Screen Australia acknowledges we work on the lands of the Gadigal people in our Ultimo office and on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in our South Melbourne office. I'd like to acknowledge the various countries that you are all listening in from today, and a very warm acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today. This webinar is being held from the lands of the Gadigal people of the larger Eora Nation. The webinar will run for 1 hour with time for questions, but before I begin, there's some housekeeping matters that I'd like to address. The webinar is being provided using Zoom webinar technology. That means that you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. We will be running a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please add your questions at any time using the Q&A tool that appears at the bottom of your screen. This recording will also be made available on the Screen Australia website later this week and will be published with the guidelines on the Screen Australia website on the 1st of July, 2025. Now, don't forget, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. I have Andrea Ulbrich and Joanna Beveridge, both investment managers in the narrative content team, who will assist me when we move to the Q&A section. We'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Naturally, with the volume of questions that might come through, we won't be able to answer all questions today, but we will add them to the frequently asked questions that will be published on the 1st of July alongside the new guidelines. So, what are we here for today? Well, the purpose of the webinar is to provide an overview of the upcoming adjustments to the narrative content funding programs, again, available July 1st on our website. While the full details will be provided then, we wanted to take this opportunity now, today, to be transparent in advance and provide an overview now to help you consider your needs and plan for the future narrative content settings. Well, let's start firstly with why we're making the changes. Screen Australia's purpose is to support a vibrant, viable screen industry that reflects the depth and diversity of Australian stories. We're evolving as an organisation to better achieve this. In narrative content, our funding programs and guidelines are evolving too. This is so we can ensure we operate with efficiency and keep our programs focused with greater impact. This better supports screen practitioners and future-proofs against industry and audience disruption. As we all acknowledge, the industry is rapidly changing. We're committed to empowering practitioners to tackle the challenges of today and seize the future opportunities. And we know audience and consumption habits are evolving rapidly. Viewing habits have altered, particularly along demographic lines and also screens on which people watch. Business models are changing and business structures continue to evolve. The market, financing, commissioning models are volatile globally. The creator economy is expanding, monetization increasing, and cinema is rising post-pandemic, post-strikes, and the collective power of gathering is still extraordinarily valued. Audiences, as we know, are increasingly gravitating to authenticity. And the more stories we have from more places, the better for our sense of who we are. Industry renewal and growth take time and commitment, and work that has insights on audience in early stages from early development and engages community has power and reach. Production costs are steep, yet Australian stories do well at home and abroad. And Australian children and their families love and trust Australian content, as does the world. To address this, the narrative content changes are designed to holistically support innovative approaches to our modern screen landscape, yet continue to support the exceptional calibre and performance of established formats. The changes have been informed through industry and insights, consultation, recent responses to the Screen Australia Industry Survey, changing viewing habits, shifts in commissioning and distribution models that place greater emphasis on market and audience. Well, at a very top line level, how are we going to do this? It means we're going to streamline programs. We're going to bring all narrative platforms, which is feature, TV, online, direct to audience, into one set of development guidelines and one set of production guidelines, a more platform agnostic approach, if you will. And this will enable distinctive narrative stories, whatever their primary and first window is, their primary platform and first window is, to reach Australian and global audiences wherever they watch. Ultimately, we really want to ensure that Australian stories that connect with their audiences and that they can thrive in a globally competitive marketplace and, of course, in our own backyard. From July 1st, funding programs will reopen with the new guidelines. And I really want to emphasise, noting that the June 19 deadline for production investment that's currently open will remain, and applications submitted for that June 19 production investment deadline will be assessed under the current guidelines. So the three new narrative programs from July 1 will be development, production, audience. And this will also naturally be inclusive of children's content. Development and production will be platform agnostic and can cover applications that are feature films, television programs, in narrative, of course, and online or direct-to-audience works. The audience program will be inclusive of feature and online direct-to-audience works. So today, what I'm going to do is provide information about development, production, and audience. We are naturally working through some finer details and consulting with some key industry bodies as well as our state and territory counterparts. We look forward to the guidelines and the application forms, a frequently asked question documents, our FAQs, and templates being available on our website come 1st July. Now let's deep dive into what these changes look like at a more granular level for these three areas: development, production, and audience. So the development guidelines. Development will continue to be an open and rolling deadline where you can apply at any time when your application materials are ready. You'll be provided with a decision on your application up to and within 8 weeks of your application being submitted, checked for its eligibility, and moved to assessment. Available funding per application will be between $10,000 to $75,000. Online and direct to audience is inclusive of AR, VR, and XR, feature film, and pre-market television projects. They're the project platforms that we can accept. There'll be a limited number of times your project can be supported by Screen Australia in development, and this is in light of the demand and the competitive nature of the fund. It will be really important that your project is able to demonstrate progression between each application. That is, if you're approved and funded. For online direct-to-audience projects and pre-market television, you can be approved, if competitive naturally, for 2 tranches of development funding. So at a maximum approval over 2 project applications, it will be a total of $150,000. For theatrical feature film, you can be approved for 3 tranches of development funding, totaling up to a max, if competitive, $225,000. Now, for theatrical feature films only, we are introducing matched market co-funding. If your feature film is able to secure genuine third-party arm's length funding, you can apply to Screen Australia in development to match that co-funding up to an amount of $75,000. Which will then take the potential total feature film development funding for a project over a number of tranches to $300,000. Development will no longer support applications for proof of concept, but we will have the potential to support visual decks and other visual material as part of your application and for that stage of development that you might be at. Just noting in terms of proof of concept, a bit later on in this webinar, I'll outline some information about short films. Back to development. If your project has been declined twice by Screen Australia for development funding, you won't be eligible to apply again. Only in exceptional circumstances will Screen Australia consider a waiver to that to decline position. Now, this does apply to any declines in the new guidelines that are to come, as well as previous Screen Australia development programs. We are not resetting on projects. Now, you can only be successful once for development funding without a production company attached. This goes to our setting of wanting to see projects progress between funding tranches. Now, whoever is the applicant for a project, as is our current setting, you do need to hold the rights for that project or be in a position to acquire those rights for the project. If the rights are shared by multiple parties, all rights holders should be included as a co-applicant. We are committed here at Screen Australia, particularly in our development program in narrative content, to ensuring minimal, what we call internally, low to no eligibility criteria for development funding. So if you have no or low credits when applying, you'll be required to provide a writing sample. And that sample might be from the project you're applying for, or it could be a sample from an unrelated project. Noting also that we will have settings for both anticipated official co-productions, in addition to settings in our guideline for unofficial co-productions within development. Naturally, we also welcome children's content for any of the platforms that are accepted in the development guidelines. You can apply for development of a project if your anticipated production budget is $30 million or below. We have raised that in recognition of the volatility of the marketplace at present. We are expanding what you can apply for in development and including elements where applicable to extend to things such as impact producer, audience testing, audience design, community manager, games designer, recognizing that connection to audience and understanding of audience whilst you're developing will only contribute to a more fulsome project. Now, Screen Australia's development funding is a contribution to the fees and the costs. We are not in a position to pay full fees in any development process, but we are looking at and will confirm that we're increasing the rate of approvable contribution fees and other costs. They have not been updated for a while. So the development contribution guide will outline these increased rates from 1st of July. The application form and required materials will be adjusted and will include elements such as a story document, a writing sample if you have low or no credits, a story development plan, and we will be providing in future a template for that. A project plan, again, we'll provide a template, and that's about the overall progression of your project and a way to talk to how you're progressing your project as opposed to just the development of the story document. Where applicable, we'll provide a template and a guide for a cultural safety plan if required. And naturally, as has been the setting for a considerable number of years, a First Nations statement if required for a project. We are going to cease the requirement at development for the pitch video element. For feature films applying for third-party arm's length co-funding, we will require evidence of that co-funding and any terms attached to that co-funding. And one important thing to note is we're going to cease the categorization of generate and premium categories in recognition that at different stages of your career, you may work in lower or higher budget work. The fund, of course, will remain open and you can apply with whatever credits you have for the scale of work that suits your stage of career. The assessment criteria for the development fund skews similarly to where Screen Australia currently sits. We're looking at story, talent and the development, audience and budget. In addition to being assessed against those stated criteria, Screen Australia will also take into consideration the range and diversity of projects that are currently in receipt of development funding, inclusive of things like a project's scale, its budget, intended audience, genre, themes, and will also consider elements such as geographic diversity, the company, applicant, and if the story contributes to the depth and diversity of Australian stories. Screen Australia wants to incentivise a range of projects on a range of platforms for a range of audiences at a range of budget levels that progress as they develop, that are held and driven by teams with insights about the future audience for their project. So that's the overview, top-line overview for development. I'll now provide an overview of narrative content investment production. So narrative content investment funding guidelines will apply to all feature film, television, online, direct-to-audience projects. So all platforms will be in the one round. Investment funding rounds will move to 4 application deadlines per year. The dates for the 25-26 financial year will be announced on the 1st of July. Noting, again, just to reiterate and confirm, that the June 19 application deadline for narrative content investment is open for applications and will be assessed under the current guideline settings. For those planning for production investment deadline after July 1st, do anticipate a deadline in either late August or early September 2025 in order to plan for your projects. Now, if you're applying for any amount below $1 million in narrative content investment, you'll be provided with the decision on your application up to and within 8 weeks of your application being submitted, naturally after eligibility checks and when your project has moved to assessment. If you are applying for any amount above $1 million, and your application is recommended for an amount above $1 million, that recommendation will be considered by the Screen Australia's board, and you'll be provided with the decision on your application up to and within 12 weeks of your application being submitted, and again after eligibility checks and you are moved to assessment. Now, for those projects that are approved, funding will be generally provided by way of a grant if your funding amount is below or at $500,000, or as a recoupable equity investment if direct funding is over $500,000. The only exception to that currently is that for a television project that is a subsequent season, Screen Australia will normally treat any approved funding as a recoupable equity investment, even if at or below $500,000. The minimum funding amount requested at the time of application, we're going to set that at $150,000. And then, of course, you can go above that. Online direct-to-audience projects, now particularly noting this is VR, XR, and AR, feature film and television projects. All of those platforms will be accepted and assessed against the same criteria in the same 4 rounds. Screen Australia is ceasing enhancement funding. We will not take applications for production enhancement, that is, projects that are seeking support for post-production and finishing after 1st of July. Screen Australia is introducing a new area, what we're calling currently Creative First Letter, or an LOI, Letter of Interest. And this is for feature film projects only. To be eligible for the Letter of Interest or LOI stream, projects will also be submitted in the 4 application rounds, those deadlines that will be up from 1st of July. They must have a production budget of $5 million or below, and a funding request to Screen Australia of $500,000 or below. Projects that are submitted in that LOI, Letter of Interest, Creative First stream, do not need an ANZ distributor or a rest of world sales agent attached at the time of application. But we will require some evidence that there has been some contact, some conversation with ANZ or ROW as part of the application materials. If you are successful in the request for an LOI from Screen Australia, an LOI will be issued to the project from the date of that decision until the next narrative content investment application deadline, where the project will need to provide that they've been able to secure that offer from ANZ distributor with deal terms in order for Screen Australia to assess that deal. If the LOI requirements are fulfilled, the project will have that $500,000 funding or any amount requested under $500,000 confirmed. Projects applying for an LOI can only apply once with that project. If the application is unsuccessful, then you cannot reapply for an LOI with that given project. Under the current guidelines, Screen Australia states a maximum dollar amount for production applications. As most of you are aware, that dollar amount is $2 million. But from July 1st, we're going to move to a slightly different approach. So from July 1st, we're going to move to a percentage of whole production budget model for funding applications. We will have maximum caps on that percentage. The reason we're doing this is to balance parity in our funding decisions against production budgets and between projects, and to really balance and manage that balance between direct funding and other federal settings, and to balance that demand across feature, TV, online, and direct to audience. These percentages will be available from 1st of July. We're still refining these percentage settings, but we have reviewed the funding decisions in investment across all platforms over the last 7 years, and particularly focused on the last 2 years to assess the most appropriate percentage setting. Again, these percentage settings will be included in the guidelines on 1st of July. So television, feature, and online or direct to audience can apply for a percentage of their production budget within the percentage setting that we provide. It's important to note that the demand on narrative content investment production funding is extraordinarily high, and approvals are currently sitting at approximately between 25 to 30% of projects that have applied. It is worth noting also and presently that most investment asks are not necessarily being approved at the full application request. Content for children will have the potential to be supported at a higher percentage of budget, and we continue to welcome and encourage content for children and their families. For those online direct-to-audience projects, often earlier career, maybe less credits, and particularly those that sit at a budget level that do not qualify for the producer offset, Screen Australia will also look to set a greater percentage of budget request level. In recognition of earlier career and lower budget applications from our online direct-to-audience part of the sector, Screen Australia will accept applications from individuals, sole traders, if the production budget is below $300,000. If approved, the applicant will need to incorporate a company to make the project before contracting with us. Now, if your project's been declined twice by Screen Australia for production funding, you'll not be eligible to apply again. After the 1st of July, if you apply for an LOI and you were declined once, you are not eligible to apply for an LOI again with that project. You can apply to the main program, but you will need all application requirements and eligibility in place to do so. Only in exceptional circumstances, Screen Australia, similar to development, we may consider a waiver to that 2 decline setting. Now, the other important thing to note is the 2 decline setting applies to the future guidelines coming on 1st of July and previous applications under previous investment application settings for Screen Australia. You can apply for production of a project if your anticipated production budget is 30 million or below. Now, moving forward from July 1st, we will enforce the 48 hours missing materials window. We urge you to apply for any production investment only when you have all your production application materials in place. The application form and the required materials will be adjusted and streamlined. We're going to reduce some elements that will be required for your application elements. For example, providing a full chain of title documents at the time of application, we're going to reduce that ask. We're also going to reduce asks such as provision of multiple versions of CVs, biogs, IMDb credits, lists, etc. We're going to streamline what you need to provide at the time of application and focus it on the material elements that are foundational to the criteria and our decision-making processes. In terms of assessment criteria, we will centre on story, talent and development, audience, budget, and where applicable, marketplace and finance. Now, in addition to being assessed against the criteria, Screen Australia may also take into consideration the range and diversity of projects that are already in receipt of production funding, inclusive of things such as a project's scale, budget, intended audience, genre, themes, and we will also have the potential to consider geographic diversity, the company, the applicant, and whether a project is likely and effectively and properly increase and amplify equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. Screen Australia wants to incentivise a range of projects on a range of platforms for a range of audiences, also at a range of budget levels that are held and driven by teams with insights about the future audience for their project. We're also introducing support for short film. For the short film fund, we will have 2 application deadlines per financial year. The dates will be announced on 1st of July. The team for an application for the short film fund must include director, writer, producer, or director/writer. And where applicable for animation works, naturally an animator. The intention of the program Short Film Fund is to support exceptional and audacious Australian live action or animated narrative short film, first and foremost for theatrical festival outcomes. If a project is approved, Screen Australia can fund up to $100,000 for a live action short and up to $125,000 for an animated short. We appreciate some teams may be able to unlock other funding. That might be private funding, post-production, agency, or other avenues for support for your short film. But Screen Australia will only accept applications for the Short Film Fund when the overall production budget is $175,000. Funding will be provided as a non-repayable grant, and the minimum grant request will be $75,000. The Narrative Content Short Film Fund can accept applications from individuals, sole traders, with the team comprising in that application of that director, writer, and producer mix. But you will need to, if successful, incorporate a company to make the project before contracting with Screen Australia. Now, to be eligible, we will have some eligibility criteria here to be able to apply for the program. The director cannot have directed a feature film, but must have some credits. For example, and these will be made explicit in the guidelines, but as a minimum, that there is one narrative short that the director has previously directed, and it must have been publicly screened in a competitively selected festival in Australia or overseas. But we're also looking at equivalency. So the director may have and/or a minimum of 2 professional programmed theatre productions that have been programmed either in a festival or a theatre company setting and have had a paying audience, or for those whose primary credits are online, direct to audience, have a small number of narrative episodes with a minimum view count that has been publicly released on a social platform. For the setting for the short film fund for the producer must have produced a short or other narrative credits. The producer can have produced a feature, but we're looking for a producer who has seen through in our settings. They've produced a work right through until it meets audience. For the writers in the team, or the slashy of writer-director, the writers can be of any level of experience, but if they're also the director, they'll need to be able to meet the settings for the director credit. Key application materials will include script for that short film, and we will be limiting the page count on that, noting what is considered allowable links for most local and international festivals, a production budget and schedule, a director lookbook, inclusive of a director statement, a cultural safety plan if required, and there'll be an opportunity within application forms for all of our funds to identify if you believe that you need a cultural safety plan for your work. And as required, naturally, a First Nations statement if applicable. We will also require a finance plan. And that's not to say that the finance plan can't be 100% Screen Australia, but it's that opportunity if there are other parties to the short film in terms of contributing to the budget, then there's an opportunity to make that clear within a finance plan. So, marketplace. We have, as you all know, a marketplace team here at Screen Australia who provides a significant service to sector on deal terms, in addition to managing all of Screen Australia's recoupment. This function and service will continue naturally, but with the shift to include the opportunity for online direct-to-audience platform work, production funding at investment level, the marketplace team will not only track, manage, oversee and provide advice and service on feature film and television projects, but they will extend this service to online and direct-to-audience projects as well. Now, this is certainly in recognition of the work sector is doing, the opportunities in the creator economy for businesses and for Australian audiences. I'll move briefly to the Audience and P&A Plus program. So Screen Australia and predecessor agencies have provided support to scaffold Australian content to Australian audiences in feature film. Screen Australia is currently undertaking an audit and review on the settings for this support and will consult with some key industry stakeholders to ensure impact and discoverability for Australian feature films, and now inclusive of online direct-to-audience work is amplified. Screen Australia acknowledges that television and commissioned content have exceptional strategy and structure with which to amplify it and reach audiences. So what happens next? Needless to say, there is a lot to digest, but I hope this session has given you the springboard you need for your future planning and thinking. I hope that you can see how these changes have been planned with you and your audience at its core. If you felt like you didn't get the chance to write everything down when you needed, don't worry, this webinar will be posted to our website in the coming days. And of course, the full narrative content updated programs, guidelines, FAQs, application deadlines where applicable, and application forms will be available on the Screen Australia website on the 1st of July. Now, I understand there are a number of questions that have been posted. I look forward to be able to answer as many as I can. And then I'll do a wrap at the end of the questions. Andrea Ulbrich, are you there and can you share some questions with me?
I thought I might start first with one about the concept of, or the decision to be all platforms, one door. This is about being digital first. If Screen Australia is backing a digital first production funding priority, how can we be certain that the assessment process deals with apples versus apples? And additionally, how will the assessment process be changing or updated?
Okay, great question. So in short, if all platforms are together in one assessment pool, how can there be surety around how each platform will be treated? And competitive might be a question underneath that question. So in short, each platform has its own setting naturally, and it's servicing maybe different parts of audience. We'll have different strategies in terms of meeting that audience. We'll have various settings in their creative and team bars. I think our collective understanding will be Australian audiences, like audiences globally, are moving between platforms and devices, and particularly generationally, are sitting in particular places. Some are on more portable screens than others. I think it's vital for Screen Australia in servicing Australian audiences through the brilliant content that many of you on this webinar make, to be able to amplify and support a range of projects on a range of platforms for a range of audiences. We have in-house at Screen Australia multiple great staff with their given expertise across those platforms, and many with a mix. All of the assessment criteria will be deployed on all platforms, and I assure you, in all of the internal setting conversations and process conversations, that there will be great competitiveness, I think, between all of those platforms, and the opportunity for all of them to be supported equally.
The next one is about online projects. So in order to get the bigger budget for online projects, what do you need? That is, do you need a lot of subscribers, or does having a big star or a well-known director count?
So the question was essentially around, if as an online direct to audience project, how will you be competitive, and how might you meet being competitive and access more investment level funding? Certainly the stage of career across any platform that you are at, the caliber of the work, the request of Screen Australia in direct funding, in combination with the capacity to deliver that, and how wide an audience a work might reach pending its scale of budget, are critical for all platforms, not just online. I think it's worth noting, in the online space, there is, as with all other platforms, an absolutely brilliant range of earlier career, lower budget, to really significant companies that have tremendous output. We will put forward the settings, and yes, I think in the guidelines on July 1, but the higher the ask, the larger the ambition, the bigger the budget. It's who is in your team, what is the reach of that content in terms of being able to meet an investment level request to Screen Australia. And there are multiple companies either at the cusp of or already working at significant budget levels with significant reach. So, you know, all I can sort of suggest is that there will be settings, you know, for example, in feature and television, it is about marketplace. In terms of being eligible, for that larger scale direct to audience, we will have settings around channel size, viewership, reach, for example, and we will ask for some information on in our application around engagement with audience and body of work.
Next question is about shorts. So how many shorts will Screen Australia support each year?
In full transparency, we are still setting our 25-26 budget. I feel that I probably can't say in a firm way because I know I've got an ambition for what number. It will be less than 10 per year and skew lower than that. That's all I feel comfortable saying at the moment.
So this question relates to both development and production funding. That's direct production funding. The question is about eligibility. As you only get 2 declines, is that per project or per applicant? For example, if my project is declined twice, can I apply again with a new project?
So just some clarification around the 2 declines. That is in relation to a project only. So if you're an applicant over, the course of doing business, whether it's across multiple programs here at Screen Australia, it is not about you as an applicant being declined twice. It is about a given project being declined twice.
This is a question around the LOIs for Creative First projects. If you get an LOI in one round and are then unable to secure your ANZ and Rest of World by the next round, can you still apply for production funding later?
Yes, so this is around the LOI settings. If you apply for an LOI and issued an LOI and are unable to fulfill that LOI by securing ANZ or Rest of World, our most important setting is ANZ naturally for Screen Australia. If you're unable, then that LOI will lapse. The LOI date that lapses will be the next production deadline. So just to clarify that. Second part, in perhaps direct answer to the question, is that yes, you can apply with that project again, but not for an LOI. You need to go into the main funding stream of feature film with TV online, and you will need your marketplace settings. So you will have had to have secured ANZ and Rest of World with appropriate deal terms and the other eligibility criteria that skew quite similarly to the current settings.
The next question relates to disability. Will Screen Australia be providing better support for disabled filmmakers in the development and production funding space?
Yeah, that's a tremendous question. Thank you very much. So the question was around support, and I'm not quite clear of the nuance, whether it's around access to guidelines, funding in projects, budget adjustments, etc. But I'll try to answer as comprehensively as possible. One thing I would like to acknowledge as part of the process on these narrative content guidelines, we have engaged a consultant to work with us on the accessibility level of these guidelines, first and foremost. So we're doing that consultation work and adjusting in response to feedback, firstly. Then in terms of, we are in discussion around some recommendations, and it still very much is a live conversation within the agency as we're setting the guidelines, finalising them in preparation for July 1st. As a general setting in the Screen Australia updated template for our guidelines, there is a section that is now included, and I'll just note this generally. I think the question is actually broader than this, but I'll just note as I go. Firstly, that if there are access requirements required regarding our guidelines, our application forms, screen reader, various things, you can contact us for us to provide information, guidelines, in a way that is appropriate to your accessibility settings, first and foremost. In terms of individual project applications, and we are, for example, and again, still, every detail is not refined, but you may recall I mentioned in the development guidelines, for example, that we're looking at being able to fund extra or additional elements than what we've been able to fund previously, including an increase to that contribution, some of the contribution guide elements. One of those settings that we are currently working on is previously or currently Screen Australia has carer costs as a line. We're looking at carers cost line and accessibility cost line as a fundable element within our development programs. Certainly within production investment, and I do note this has been in previous projects that have been funded and that Screen Australia has done business with, that there are line items at the behest of the production entity or producer that articulate the costs and accessibility needs and processes that need to be put in place as part of a production budget. And naturally, they have been considered as part of that budget. And whilst I've been at Screen Australia since end of September in this role, they have been approved and afforded within the natural course of a production budget. I hope that goes some way to answer or at least address areas around that question.
The next one is about pitch videos. Why did Screen Australia choose to remove pitch videos from applications?
Firstly, there has been consistent, ongoing feedback to Screen Australia from multiple quarters, the East, West, North, South, earlier career established, in casual and ongoing conversations, as well as in writing about how despised they are, having that pitch video requirement. That's part one. So that was listened to quite strongly. There has also been, I think, operationally, for many people, and this has been articulated from many different quarters, of just having the time and the resourcing and the concern that if you're not able to create a pitchy pitch video, whether an application might be diminished. So a sort of equity issue, if people have got access and current skills to get capital P pitch in their videos. There is also, I think, from feedback, and this comes a lot to our program operations team, who many of you will do business with, that the sheer technical back and forth sometimes on the uploadable, the linkable, the passwordable creates a level of repeated frustration for many applicants. Now, it's noted though, so it's been driven strongly by sector in terms of us listening to sector. I think one of the risks that has been discussed is if people don't have access to talk to their project, is a document vivid enough? One of the settings that we will do is provide, as I mentioned, for development, a template. Because there is, I think, at times some concern about what is actually required in that development statement, for example, or that development plan for a project. So we're looking to sort of standardise the questions and the settings for those to create a more equitable basis across all applications. I hope that goes some way to answer it, but that's not to diminish the joy that and value that Screen Australia staff, particularly in assessing things, and our externals have valued about those videos. So they're certainly not wasted in the sort of history of when they were required.
The next one is again about short films, lots of questions about short films. Could the team be made up of a writer, producer, and director? There are a lot of writers, producers moving towards the showrunner model in TV, and this would be a great opportunity to gain these skills early on.
And so the question is, can it be, so the way that I articulated the setting was writer, separate human, director, separate human, producer, separate human, and then went, but writer, director could be. So I understand the question is, well, what if it's a writer, producer? I'll take that on notice, but in principle, I think, yes, that is a setting we should consider. It's great feedback. The important thing to note, though, would be that the writer-producer, if they're one, and you've got then director, the writer-producer would have to be able to meet the producer setting in terms of our eligibility requirement.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are quite a few questions about the level of experience that is expected on the short film team. Can you just expand on that? What level of experience is required?
Okay. So for directors, they need to, I'll be overt. For directors, they need to have directed something. And by something, to be clear, if that something is film, they cannot have directed a feature film. They must have directed a short film that's been publicly released in Australia or internationally in a festival setting, in a competitively selected festival, or take away the film element, they must be a director who has directed 2 main stage theatre works in a programmed season, whether that's a festival or a theatre production company context that has had, so someone other than that director has programmed that work and for a paying audience. And if you have no theatre experience, no short film experience, then we would also select, accept a director who has online direct-to-audience experience. We're currently looking at the settings, but so do check from July 1. But currently, our view is a minimum of 6 episodes of any length for online direct-to-audience, and we're working on the settings of a minimum count view per those episodes. The other thing just to emphasize is that the Short Film Fund is about supporting work for an intended theatrical festival competitive selection setting. It is not about a short film for any other platform, i.e. online. But that's not to say online practitioners can't be eligible with their online practice, but the intention is very much that festival theatrical outcome.
So this is again about the all platforms, one door. If it's one big pool of funding, how will it be balanced so that it's fair to all types and all budgets?
This is a question about, I suppose, if I can rephrase it, the equity of what available funding exists within Screen Australia for production investment or indeed development, and the equity between platforms. So currently, in the current year's budget, there are key areas in our settings internally that are nominally for, development has its budget, online development has its budget, online production investment has its budget, online initiatives has its budget, and then, television and feature film. So the work will be about what are our anticipated settings, and we will put those in place, which we measure after or going into and after every meeting to ensure that we are looking at a balance across platform, a balance across earlier career to the most mature practitioners. That is already part of our setting and will continue being part of our setting moving forward.
How long will it be before the Screen Australia website is streamlined and updated to reflect all these changes that we're talking about? Thank you.
Great question. So slightly, not a lot, but slightly out of scope. So the 1st of July is when all of the updates to program will be available. The larger work that is being undertaken on the Screen Australia website, I believe, will be in place early in the 4th quarter of this year. So yes, it will come, but it will come after the guidelines are up. I really appreciate that there may be many more questions after the webinar. The staff of the Narrative Content Unit here at Screen Australia, they are not in a position yet to provide more information beyond what I've already discussed today or what I have answered. So do look out for the details on 1st of July. We're very excited by this next chapter. We hope you are too. I do want to take a moment just to thank you all for joining and thank you for your time. Any unanswered questions have been captured and they'll be taken into account with the frequently asked questions when the guidelines are published on the 1st of July. This recording will also be made available on the Screen Australia website later this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and follow our social channels for the latest Screen Australia and industry updates.